The neon hum of the Synapse Institute quad didn't reach the fourth floor of the server dorms, but the steady rhythmic pulse of Lyra's custom rig did. It was 3:14 a.m. The air in her small room tasted like ozone and lukewarm energy drinks. On her monitors, lines of glowing green syntax cascaded down the screen, casting fractured shadows across her face. For 21 days, the university police had maintained the same company line. Your sister took a voluntary mental health sabbatical. They called it a system reset. But Julian wouldn't have left her life's work, her neuroengineering thesis, sitting on an open terminal. She wouldn't have left without saying goodbye to Lyra. "Come on," Lyra whispered, her fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. Her knuckles were white, her eyes bloodshot. "Talk to me, Jules." She was deep inside the university's encrypted cloud infrastructure, a place no undergraduate belonged. Julian had built her personal drive using a proprietary multi-layered firewall she called the Vance 7. It was an elegant piece of digital architecture designed to keep out corporate spies and nosy faculty members. But Julian had taught Lyra how to code, and more importantly, she had taught Lyra how she thought. Lyra isolated the final security node. It was a digital deadbolt requiring a specific alphanumeric key. She didn't try to brute force it. That would trigger a campus-wide security sweep. Instead, she typed in the coordinate sequence of the constellations they used to map on their ceiling as kids. Access granted. The terminal chimed, a soft, synthetic sound that felt violently loud in the quiet room. Lyra held her breath. The directory expanded, revealing dozens of wiped folders. Someone had been here. They had scrubbed Julian's research, her emails, her personal logs. Everything was gone, except for one isolated partition hidden in the root directory. It was a single file, massive and heavily encrypted. OVA log 0518 CRPT. Lyra dragged the file into her local decryption suite. The software began tearing through the encryption algorithms, the cooling fans on her rig spinning up to a high-pitched whine. Decrypting, 24%, 58%, 89%. Warning, file structure corrupted, attempting force render. "Don't crash," Lyra muttered, leaning closer to the glass. "Do not crash on me now." The progress bar hit 100%. The screen flashed black, and then a video playback window initialized. Lyra expected a frantic video diary, an audio log, or maybe a stolen corporate schematic. Instead, the video feed was dark, shrouded in strange vertical shadows. The audio was a low ambient hiss, punctured by the distant sound of electronic typing. Lyra frowned, leaning in. The camera angle was slightly tilted, looking downward through what appeared to be wooden slats. It took her brain 3 agonizing seconds to recognize the environment. The slatted wood was her own closet door. The camera was positioned inside her closet, looking out into her bedroom. On the screen, a girl sat at a cluttered desk, her face illuminated by the harsh glow of dual monitors. The girl on the screen was wearing an oversized black hoodie, her dark hair pinned back with a plastic claw clip. She was typing furiously, her shoulders tense with desperation. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. She looked down at her own hands, then back at the monitor. The video feed wasn't a recording. The timestamp in the bottom right corner was updating in real time, matching the digital clock on her desk down to the millisecond. Slowly, terrifyingly, Lyra stopped typing. On the monitor, the girl in the video stopped typing too. Lyra sat entirely paralyzed, her heart slamming against her ribs like a trapped bird. She didn't dare turn around. On the screen, a shadow shifted in the darkness of the closet behind the digital version of herself, and a pale, gloved hand began to slowly push the closet door open. Lyra didn't look back. Survival instinct, cold and primal, overridden her paralysis. She grabbed her portable deck, the sleek, graphite-framed drive containing her decryption tools, and threw herself sideways out of the chair just as a metallic hiss cut through the hum of her computer fans. She hit the floor hard, rolling against the base of her bed. Behind her, The closet door swung fully open with a sharp creak. A figure clad in matte black tactical gear lunged forward, a heavy pneumatic extraction needle glinting in the monitor light. Lyra scrambled to her feet, kicked her desk chair directly into the intruder's shins, and bolted for the dorm door. She yanked it open, threw herself into the brightly lit hallway, and slammed the heavy fire door shut behind her. She didn't stop to see if they were following. She ran. 10 minutes later, she was blocks away from the sterile glass and steel architecture of the Synapse upper campus, slipping into the damp, subterranean tunnels of the stacks. This was the university's underbelly, where abandoned steam pipes met illegal fiber optic lines, and where the campus rules didn't apply. She stopped outside a door marked with a fading, spray-painted biohazard symbol. She hammered on the metal surface. "Boss, open the damn door!" A security camera whirred to life above her, its lens glowing a faint, judgmental blue. A moment later, the heavy deadbolt clicked, and the door swung open to reveal Kalen Voss. Kalen looked exactly like what he was, a man who lived in the margins of the digital underworld. His dark hair was messy, a faint smudge of graphite grease lined his jawline, and his eyes were sharp, calculating, and perpetually tired. He was wearing a grease-stained tech apron over a faded hoodie. "Vance," Kalen said, leaning against the doorframe, entirely unfazed by her breathless, disheveled state. "It's 4 a.m. If you're here to return that signal scrambler you borrowed, you're late. If you're here to crash, my couch is covered in server parts." "Someone was in my room," Lyra panted, pushing past him into the cluttered warmth of his workshop. The space was a graveyard of stripped neural decks, flickering holographic displays, and the faint, sweet scent of synthetic clove tobacco. "Someone with an extraction rig. They bypassed my local grid. I need a full system sweep on my portable deck right now. I think I'm being tracked." Kalen closed the door, locking it with 3 distinct, heavy thuds. He walked over to his central workbench, picking up a soldering iron. "Look, Lyra, you're a brilliant coder, but you're paranoid. You've been twitchy ever since the university put your sister on medical leave. Students get burned out. They leave. It happens." "She didn't leave." Lyra slammed her portable deck onto the workbench, scattering a pile of microchips. "I breached her private drive. Someone scrubbed it, Kalen. And when I opened the last file, it was a live feed of me eyes from inside my own closet. They were waiting for me to find it." Kalen paused, the soldering iron hovering an inch above a circuit board. His easygoing posture stiffened. "A live feed? From a closed university network?" "Yes. Now sweep my deck, please." Kalen sighed, setting the tool down. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "Lyra, I run black market memory chips for rich frat boys who want to cheat on their finals or relive a high-end club night they can't afford. I don't do corporate espionage. I don't mess with the university's internal security. If I help you and the dean's enforcers catch wind of it, I lose my license, my shop, and my mind. Literally. Go to the campus police." "The campus police are the ones who told me she was on a sabbatical," Lyra shouted, her voice cracking. "Julian found something. She hid it in a file, and now she's gone. You knew her, Kalen. You traded tech with her. Are you really going to let them just rewrite her out of existence?" At the mention of Julian's name, Kalen's expression shifted. The cynical, detached mask dropped, replaced by something heavy and dark. He looked at Lyra for a long, silent moment, evaluating the raw desperation in her eyes. "Julian," he murmured softly. He didn't reach for her deck. Instead, he walked over to the back wall of his shop, pulling aside a hanging tapestry of an old circuit schematic. Behind it sat a military-grade biometric safe, the kind used by high-level corporate executives to store proprietary neural data. Kalen pressed his palm to the scanner. The safe hissed as the pressurized seal broke. 3 days ago, a courier dropped something off, Kalen said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. No return address, just a massive amount of cryptocurrency to hold on to it until the right person came looking. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't want to know. He reached into the vault and pulled out a heavy matte black neural cartridge. It was pristine, completely devoid of the usual scratches found on black market tech, and its internal cooling fluid glowed with a faint, pulsing violet light. Kaylin turned the cartridge over, holding it out so Lyra could see the physical laser-etched label on the casing. Lyra's breath hitched. Etched into the black polymer were 2 lines of text. Subject, Vance, Lyra. Data type, full neural extraction log. Timestamp, May 19th, 2026, 04 Gao. Lyra stared at the pulsing violet light, her mind spinning into freefall. Today was May 18th. The cartridge containing her stolen mind was dated for tomorrow. Tomorrow, Lyra whispered, her voice barely a breath. That's impossible. You can't record a memory that hasn't happened yet. The neural architecture required to simulate a chronological shift like that doesn't exist. In the legal market? Yeah, it doesn't, Kaylin said. He picked up a pair of heavy neural jacks, his expression grim. But in the black labs, Thorne's people have been experimenting with predictive algorithms for years. They call it temporal modeling. They take your current behavioral patterns, your biometric data, your schedule, and they render a hyper-accurate projection of what you're likely to do. A projection isn't a memory cartridge, Kaylin. This is a completed, finalized neural dump. Look at the data density. She pointed to the pulsing violet indicator. That's a real cognitive record. There's only one way to find out, Kaylin said, walking over to an operating chair that looked like a cross between a dentist seat and a torture device. It was surrounded by a halo of flickering holographic monitors. We illegal wire into it. I'll split the feed so I can monitor your vitals. If your brain chemistry starts to spike into a seizure state, I pull the plug. Agreed? Lyra didn't hesitate. She climbed into the chair, the cold synth leather chilling her through her hoodie. Do it. Kaylin worked with practiced, terrifying speed. He attached the cold gel pads of the neural link to her temples. He slid the black cartridge into the deck's primary drive. The machine groaned, its internal cooling pumps humming to life, flooding the room with a sharper scent of ozone. Deep breaths, Kaylin murmured, his hand hovering over the master switch. Entering the feed in 3, 2, 1. The world didn't just go black, it shattered. Lyra gasped as a violent rush of sensory data slammed into her cortex. It wasn't like watching a movie. It was the terrifying, total immersion of a lived experience. She smelled iron and wet concrete. She felt cold, heavy rain pelting against her face. She was running. Her lungs burned, her heart hammering a frantic, agonizing rhythm against her ribs. But she wasn't in control of her body. She was a passenger in her own skin, locked behind her own eyes. She looked down at her hands. They were covered in a slick, dark fluid. Blood. In her right hand, she was gripping a heavy, military-grade data spike. A brutal tool used to forcibly puncture neural ports and extract data by destroying the organic tissue around it. The tip of the spike was dripping with a mixture of crimson and luminescent blue spinal fluid. The memory version of herself sprinted around a corner, entering the sterile, white-tiled corridors of the Synapse Institute's subterranean archives. A figure stepped into the hallway. It was an older campus security guard, Officer Martinez, a man who had smiled and waved at Lyra every morning at the campus gates for the last 2 years. Wait! Stop! Martinez shouted, reaching for his stun baton. But the Lyra in the memory didn't stop. With a fluid, terrifying speed that she didn't know she possessed, she lunged forward. She dodged Martinez's clumsy swing, grabbed the back of his collar, and drove the data spike directly into the neural port at the base of his skull. A sickening crunch echoed through her mind. The sensory feed registered a sudden, horrific spike of someone else's terror, a brief wireless bleed-over as Martinez's consciousness short-circuited. The older man's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. The memory Lyra knelt over the body, her hands trembling as she began pulling data from his terminal. No, no, no! The real Lyra screamed inside her own mind, fighting against the neural tether. Let me out! Let me out! With a violent jerk, Lyra snapped back into reality. She tore the gel pads from her temples, throwing herself out of Kaylin's operating chair. She collapsed onto her hands and knees on the floor, dry heaving, her entire body shaking uncontrollably. Hey, look at me! Kaylin was instantly beside her, gripping her shoulders to steady her. It wasn't real, Lyra. It hasn't happened. It's a simulation. It has to be. It felt real, Kaylin, she sobbed, gripping his forearms. The smell, the weight of the spike, the taste of the adrenaline. I killed him. I'm going to kill him. Look at the screen, Kaylin said, his voice dropping into a tense, terrifying register. He pointed up at the central diagnostic monitor. The decryption software had finally parsed the cartridge's metadata, displaying the exact local time the memory was recorded. Timestamp, May 18th, 2026, 07. Lyra blinked, wiping the cold sweat from her eyes. She looked from the monitor to the digital clock on Kaylin's workbench. The glowing red numbers read 6:59:45. 15 seconds left. Kaylin? Lyra whispered, her voice cracking. The timestamp on the cartridge isn't for tomorrow. The file code was corrupted. It's for now. Before Kaylin could reply, the heavy steel door of his underground workshop groaned. A massive explosive force slammed into it from the outside, buckling the metal hinges inward. Outside in the corridor, the deafening synthesized wail of campus security sirens pierced the air, accompanied by the heavy, rhythmic thud of tactical boots. The workbench clock flipped to 070. With a deafening crash, the workshop door flew off its hinges, and a flashbang grenade skittered across the concrete floor straight toward Lyra's feet. Down! Kaylin roared. Before Lyra could process the word, he lunged across the workspace, tackling her to the concrete floor behind a heavy steel workbench. An instant later, the flashbang detonated. Even with her eyes squeezed shut and her hands pressed over her ears, the world exploded into a blinding white glare and a high-pitched, concussive ring that vibrated straight through her teeth. The smell of scorched magnesium choked the air. Through the visual static, Lyra saw the dark, heavy silhouettes of Synapse Institute enforcers breaching the shattered doorway, their weapon-mounted lasers cutting red lines through the smoke. Movement left, a synthesized voice barked through a tactical radio. Kaylin didn't give them time to aim. He reached under the lip of the workbench and yanked a manual release lever. A heavy floor plate beneath them dropped away, and they slid backward into a steep, rusted maintenance chute. Lyra tumbled into the pitch black, scraping her elbows against corrugated metal before dropping onto a wet concrete walkway below. Kaylin landed a second later, hitting the button on a localized EMP charge he'd left in the chute. A muffled thump vibrated above them, followed by the sound of dying electronics and shouting enforcers. Come on, Kaylin hissed, grabbing her arm and pulling her into a sprint. The EMP bought us 3 minutes max before their auxiliary tracking grid reboots. They navigated a labyrinth of dripping steam pipes and ancient brick conduits. The air grew thicker, colder, and increasingly foul, losing the sterile scent of the upper campus and taking on the rot of the lower city. This was the boundary line, the forgotten subterranean arteries that fed the university's waste into the slums outside. After 10 minutes of breathless running, Kaylin pushed open a rusted iron grate. Lyra stepped through and immediately shielded her eyes. The quiet dark of the tunnels was instantly replaced by a violent, chaotic assault of light and sound. They were standing in the lattice. If the Synapse Institute was a monument to clean, corporate perfection, the lattice was its grotesque, beautiful shadow. A multi-layered slum built into the scaffolding of the city's industrial foundations, it was drenched in the eternal, artificial glow of towering holographic billboards, advertising neural upgrades and synthetic escapes. Rain fell in a greasy drizzle, catching the pink and cyan neon from the market stalls below. The streets were packed with bodies, students skipping campus curfew, black market data dealers, and ghosts, the tragic souls whose brains had been fried by cheap bootleg memory cartridges, leaving them wandering the alleys with vacant, twitching eyes. Kalen pulled his hood low over his face, guiding Lyra through a dense crowd gathered around a synthetic noodle stand. "They won't follow us out here," Lyra panted, her heart still racing from the escape. "Will they? The enforcers? No. They don't have jurisdiction in the lattice," Kalen said, his eyes scanning the rooftops and balconies. "But Thorne's private corporate security doesn't care about borders. We need to vanish, and we need to figure out what was on that cartridge." "You saw the memory," Lyra said, her voice shaking as they pushed past a group of heavily augmented street docs. "I killed Martinez, but I didn't do it. How could a memory exist before it happens?" "Because it wasn't a projection of the future, Lyra. It was a recording of a past event that you haven't lived yet," Kalen said, dropping his voice to a whisper as they stepped into a narrower, darker alleyway. "Julian was working on a deep-level neural synchronization protocol. I think someone cloned your neural matrix. The person who killed the guard wasn't you, but they have your brain architecture. And if they want to sell that technology, there's only one place they'd do it. The Codex," Lyra remembered, the name from Kalen's safe file echoing in her head. "Exactly. It's the most exclusive underground auction in the city. High-profile, stolen corporate data, illicit neural patterns, military-grade memories, everything goes to the highest bidder. If Julian's mind dump is on the block, it means she's either dead or someone is peeling her brain apart, layer by layer." The horror of the thought hit Lyra like a physical blow. She staggered slightly, leaning against the damp brick wall of an alley that overlooked the central market square. Below them, hundreds of buyers shifted through the stalls, their faces obscured by digital mask filters and optical scramblers. She closed her eyes, trying to force the panic down, trying to think like a coder. Isolate the variables, find the logic. When she opened her eyes, her gaze drifted down to the crowded square below. 100 feet away, standing beneath the flickering pink glow of a neon sign shaped like a broken wing, a figure stood completely still among the rushing crowd. The person was wearing a heavy, oil-stained leather jacket with a distinctive silver patch on the shoulder, a patch Lyra had stitched herself using conductive thread. The figure pulled back her hood. It was Julian. Her face was pale, her expression entirely devoid of the warmth Lyra remembered, but it was undeniably her. Julian looked straight up at the balcony, her eyes locking onto Lyra with terrifying laser-focused precision. "Jules!" Lyra yelled, throwing herself against the rusted railing. "Julian!" Kalen grabbed her jacket, trying to pull her back. "Lyra, wait, it's a trap." Before Lyra could break away, Julian reached inside her leather jacket. Her movements were smooth, mechanical, and completely unnatural. She pulled out a sleek, matte black pistol, fitted with a heavy cylindrical silencer. Without a single flicker of hesitation or emotion in her eyes, Julian raised the weapon, leveled the barrel directly at Lyra's chest, and squeezed the trigger. The crack of the gunshot was tiny, swallowed by the roar of the market, but the supersonic hiss of the bullet passing an inch from Lyra's left ear was deafening. The air displaced by the round whipped her hair across her face. She flinched, bracing for the impact, but behind her, a heavy, wet thud echoed against the concrete balcony. Lyra spun around. A man clad in a matte black corporate stealth coat was collapsing to his knees. His face was obscured by an active optical scrambler mask that flickered and died as his consciousness faded, revealing the sharp, cold features of a premier synapse extraction agent. Dropping from his twitching fingers was a heavy, pneumatic neural syringe, the exact same model that had breached her dorm room just hours ago. He hadn't been trying to kill her. He had been seconds away from plunging the needle into her neck. Julian hadn't been aiming at Lyra. She had been saving her. "Jules!" Lyra screamed, turning back to the railing. Down in the square, Julian lowered the silenced pistol. For a fraction of a second, a flicker of something raw and agonizingly human passed over her pale face, a silent plea. before she turned on her heel and vanished into the swirling, multicolored sea of the neon-drenched crowd. "Lyra, we have to move. Now," Kalen hissed, grabbing her upper arm. His grip was like iron. That shot was silenced, but a dead body on a balcony drops the stealth rating of this alley to 0. The corporate grid will pick up his biometric flatline in seconds. "No, she's out there." Lyra fought against his grip, her boots skidding on the wet, greasy concrete. "You saw her. She's alive, Kalen. I'm not leaving her." "She's gone, Lyra. Look at the crowd. She's ghosted." Kalen hauled her back toward the dark mouth of the maintenance tunnel, but Lyra's gaze shifted to the dying extraction agent. The man was choking, his hands clawing at the front of his tactical vest where Julian's bullet had pierced his chest. A strange, luminescent blue fluid was mixing with the dark blood pooling beneath him, the telltale sign of a high-grade neural overclock system running through his veins. Driven by a desperate impulse, Lyra tore herself away from Kalen and dropped to her knees beside the dying agent. She reached for his vest, looking for a datapad, an ID chip, a corporate registry, anything that would tell her who sent him. "Who are you?" she demanded, grabbing his tactical collar. "Who issued the extraction order for Julian Vance?" The agent's eyes rolled back, targeting her face through a glaze of crimson. His jaw worked, a wet, rattling breath escaping his throat. He didn't look at her with anger. He looked at her with a profound, terrifying pity. With a sudden, violent surge of adrenaline, the man's hand shot up. His blood-slicked fingers clamped down onto the fabric of Lyra's oversized hoodie, pulling her face down until she was mere inches from his lips. Kalen reached for his sidearm, stepping forward to intervene but froze as the man began to speak. The agent didn't use a corporate code. He didn't give a name. Instead, his voice dropped to a ragged, desperate whisper that cut straight through the ambient hum of the cyberpunk slums below. "Don't trust the farm," the man wheezed, his grip tightening violently, tearing the fabric of her sleeve. "Don't trust your childhood, Lyra. It never happened." The light instantly vanished from the agent's eyes. His hand relaxed, slipping from her jacket and hitting the concrete with a heavy slap. Lyra sat frozen on her shins, the rain soaking through her jeans, his final words echoing in her mind like a corrupted line of code. "Don't trust your childhood. It never happened." Behind them, the high-pitched harmonic whine of approaching corporate hunter drones began to echo through the narrow alleyway. The searchlights of the hunter drones cut through the greasy rain like dual lasers, sweeping across the concrete balcony where the extraction agent lay dead. "Move!" Kalen barked, his arm locking around Lyra's waist as he hauled her backward into the shadows of a defunct ventilation shaft. An instant later, a sleek, arachnid-like drone dropped from the upper scaffolding, its multifaceted optic sensors spinning a frantic red. It let out a high-pitched electronic screech as it detected the fresh biological flatline on the floor. Kalen didn't wait for it to deploy its scanning grid. He jammed a manual override tool into the shaft's heavy steel access panel, slammed it open, and literally threw Lyra inside before diving in after her. They tumbled down a vertical pitch-black drop, landing hard on a bed of discarded fiberglass insulation. Above them, the sound of tearing metal and automated gunfire echoed through the vents. The drones were tearing the balcony apart, but the damp, lead-lined interior of the structural walls effectively masked their heat signatures. They crawled through the suffocating, dusty dark for what felt like hours, navigating the skeletal interior of the lattice until Kalen kicked open an air vent leading into a secondary safe house, a cramped, windowless server closet tucked behind a low-tier cyber clinic. Lyra collapsed onto a stack of synthetic foam crates, her hands shaking so violently she could barely unclip her portable deck. Her mind was a chaotic loop, replaying the agent's final moments. "Don't trust the farm. Don't trust your childhood, Lyra. It never happened." "He was lying," Lyra whispered into the dark, her voice trembling. "He was trying to mess with my head, a psychological countermeasure to throw me off." Kalen was at a terminal across the room, plugging in a battery of localized firewalls to secure the perimeter. He paused, turning to look at her, his expression uncharacteristically soft. "Lyra, look at me. What farm was he talking about?" "The homestead," she said instantly, the memories rushing forward to comfort her. "Before Julian and I came to the Synapse Institute, we lived in the valley 3 hours north. Acres of golden wheat, an old red barn with a rusted weather vane. I remember the smell of the soil after the rain. I remember skinning my knee on the tractor. I remember my mother teaching me how to code on an old outdated terminal at the kitchen table. I know my life, Kalen." Kalen didn't argue. He walked over, picked up a medical-grade neural diagnostic scanner, a sleek, silver crown embedded with dozens of microscopic quantum needles, and held it out to her. "There's only one way to know if a file has been tampered with," Kalen said quietly. "You run a deep-level checksum. Scan your own matrix, Lyra. Let the code speak." Lyra stared at the silver crown. The thought of letting a diagnostic tool peer into the deepest recesses of her own consciousness terrified her, but the agent's dying whisper was a virus in her mind, eating away at her certainty. Slowly, she took the crown and placed it over her brow. The quantum needles engaged with a faint, chilling tingle at the base of her skull. She connected the output wire directly to Kalen's high-resolution monitor. "Initializing deep cortical mapping," Lyra muttered, her fingers tapping a command into the terminal. The monitor flickered, rendering a hyper-complex 3-dimensional map of her brain's neural pathways. Organic memories typically looked like wild, chaotic root systems, tangled, asymmetrical, and overlapping in vibrant shades of electric blue. But as the scanner mapped her early childhood temporal lobe, the visual display changed. Lyra's breath hitched. Segments of her neural pathways were completely uniform. Where there should have been a messy, organic web of childhood recollections, there were massive, perfectly geometric blocks of void space. They weren't damaged or decayed. They were surgically extracted, clean-cut squares. Even more terrifyingly, these empty spaces weren't empty. They were populated by a shimmering golden mesh of artificial data. Neural Diagnostic System Report. Warning, non-organic memory architecture detected. Sector 0409, replicated data subroutines, stable, metadata. Signature, Vance Core, Engine, V1. "No," Lyra whispered, pressing her hands to her temples. "No, that's impossible." She clicked into the golden mesh, forcing the system to display the raw data beneath the memory of her childhood. She isolated the file for the old red barn. She isolated the memory of her mother's voice. The screen didn't show images or sensory feedback. It showed lines of hyper-elegant, flawlessly compiled, synthetic code. The memory of the farm wasn't a biological record. It was a beautifully written simulation, executing a loop every time she tried to remember her past. "It's a placeholder," Kalen said, his voice laced with absolute horror as he leaned over her shoulder. "Someone scrubbed your real life and pasted a stock image narrative over the top of it." Desperate, bleeding tears of frustration, Lyra forced the scanner to dig deeper, bypassing the synthetic code to search for the hidden system logs, the digital footprint left behind by whoever had performed the operation. She hunted for the original file creation date, the digital registry of the lab that had altered her brain. The diagnostic tool Word, bypassing 3 layers of encrypted corporate firewalls before pulling up a single, ancient medical registry index file from a secure archive. Lyra stared at the screen, her heart stopping completely. The file didn't originate from a rural clinic in the Northern Valley. The registry document was stamped with the distinctive, stylized logo of the Synapse Institute. According to the official system log, on the exact dates she supposedly spent running through fields of wheat at 10 years old, Lyra Vance wasn't a child on a farm. She was registered as a high-priority corporate asset, locked inside Patient Ward. 4. High-Security Neural Lab, Synapse Mainframe Tower. The synthetic skin on Dr. Alistair Thorne's face didn't have a single wrinkle, but his eyes carried the weight of a man who owned the city's secrets. "The youth of today are so obsessed with legacy," Thorne said, his voice a smooth baritone hum that resonated perfectly in the cavernous, glass-walled office. He poured 2 glasses of amber synthetic whiskey, the ice clinking softly. They forget that the past is just a poorly optimized data storage system, fragile, corruptible. Lyra sat across from him in a sleek, ergonomic leather chair that felt entirely too comfortable for an interrogation. Her heart was beating a frantic rhythm against her ribs, but her face was a mask of perfect, academic curiosity. It had taken her exactly 3 hours to forge the credentials. Using her portable deck and a snippet of Kalen's black market decryption code, she had bypassed the Synapse Institute's public relations firewall, embedding herself into the campus network as a student journalist for the Synapse Chronicle. Her cover story, an exclusive profile on Thorne's upcoming keynote address regarding the Global Codex, the university's proprietary global memory infrastructure. "I think our readers are just terrified of forgetting who they are, Dr. Thorne," Lyra said, leaning forward, tapping a finger against her digital notepad. In reality, her pad wasn't recording his words. It was actively broadcasting a localized wireless probe, trying to breach the secure terminal built into Thorne's mahogany desk. Thorne smiled. It was a practiced, chillingly symmetrical movement. He walked over, placing 1 glass on her side of the desk before sitting down. "Identity is a fluid concept, Miss Vance. If I could offer you a memory of a perfect childhood, one where you never suffered, never failed, would you care if it was real? Or would you simply enjoy the peace it brought you?" Lyra froze. The word childhood hung in the air between them like a physical wire. Did he know? Had the network flagged her biometric scan from the safe house? On her lap, hidden beneath the lip of the desk, her digital notepad vibrated twice against her knee. Probe successful. Accessing Sector 04. Main encryption key required. She needed him to keep talking. She needed to distract him while her probe hunted for the master password to Patient Ward 4. "Peace built on a lie isn't peace," Lyra said, forced anger bleeding into her tone to keep her voice from shaking. "It's captivity. If you rewrite a person's history, you erase their choices. You change their soul." "The soul is just code, my dear. Flawed, unoptimized code," Thorne said smoothly, taking a slow sip of his drink. "Your sister understood that. Julian was a visionary. She realized that the human brain is the ultimate hardware, but our memories are a chaotic mess of trauma and inefficiency. She wanted to build a world where we could choose what we carry." "If she agreed with you, then where is she?" Lyra demanded, dropping the journalistic facade entirely. "Why did her private files require a military-grade extraction bypass? Why did one of your agents try to clear my mind in my own dorm room?" Thorne didn't look surprised by her outburst. He didn't call security. He simply set his glass down with a soft, deliberate clink that echoed off the high glass ceilings. Outside his window, the neon billboards of the lattice flickered in the distance, casting long, fractured shadows across his face. "Julian is undergoing a massive system upgrade," Thorne said softly, leaning over the desk. His gaze locked onto hers, cold and entirely devoid of empathy. She reached a bottleneck in her research. She needed a stable environment to compile the final runtime of the Global Codex. She went willingly, Lyra. The notepad on Lyra's lap vibrated violently. "Critical error. Antivirus trace detected. IP tracking terminals D main core tower 01. Abort infiltration immediately." Lyra swallowed hard, grabbing her notepad and tucking it into her bag. She stood up, her knees weak but her resolve hardening. "This interview is over, Dr. Thorne. Thank you for your time." She turned on her heel and walked toward the massive, seamless glass doors of his office. Her hand hovered over the biometric exit panel, waiting for the system to clear her clearance code. "You always were a stubborn child." Thorne's voice floated across the room, casual and light. Lyra paused, her hand freezing an inch from the glass sensor. "I remember when your mother brought you to the lab for the first time," Thorne murmured, his voice laced with an unsettling, nostalgic warmth. "You were crying because you dropped your favorite toy down the drainage grate outside the gates, a little tin robot with a broken wing. Do you remember what you called it, little bird? You called it Sparky. A cold spike of pure terror shot straight down Lyra's spine. The memory hit her instantly, clear, vivid, and terrifying. She remembered the tin robot. She remembered the broken wing. But she had never told a soul about that toy. Not Kaylin, not her classmates. The only person who knew that name was Julian. Slowly, Lyra turned her head to look back over her shoulder. Dr. Thorne was sitting back in his leather chair, the amber liquid swirling in his glass, his perfect synthetic smile stretching wide across his face as the office doors suddenly clicked, locking her inside from the outside network. The biometric lock on the dean's office door clicked like a guillotine. Lyra didn't look back at Thorne's smile. She pulled her portable deck from her bag, jammed a manual override split cable directly into the door's maintenance port, and uploaded a destructive virus loop Kaylin had coded for emergencies. The glass door shivered, their electromagnetic seals overloading with a violent spark. She threw her shoulder against the glass, broke through into the corridor, and sprinted for the service elevator before Thorne's security team could even deploy. 6 hours later, she was back in the damp, neon-choked underbelly of the Lattice, standing outside an abandoned, neo-Gothic cathedral that had been converted into a black market haven. "You're lucky to be alive," Kaylin muttered, adjusting the stiff collar of a high-end corporate blazer. He looked completely different, his grease-stained apron replaced by sleek, tailored obsidian threads that made him look like a wealthy data broker from the upper districts. "He knew about Sparky, Kaylin," Lyra said, her voice shaking as she pulled a silk hood over her dark hair. Her own outfit was an elegant dark cocktail dress borrowed from one of Kaylin's underground contacts, designed to blend into the elite crowd. The only way Thorne could know that name is if he pulled it directly out of Julian's mind. Or mine. "We get her back tonight," Kaylin said grimly, holding up 2 shimmering, translucent VIP passes. "These cost me 3 months of black market revenue, but they get us onto the floor of the Codex auction. According to the Darknet manifests, Julian's final mind dump is the headline item." They walked past 2 massive cybernetic bouncers, whose eyes burned with active weapon targeting overlays. Stepping through the cathedral's arched doorway, the scent of ancient incense blended with the sharp chemical tang of liquid nitrogen cooling units. The nave of the church had been stripped of its pews. In their place stood rows of sleek, velvet-lined booths, filled with the city's most dangerous elite. Corporate executives wearing optical scrambler masks, wealthy tech heirs looking for illegal thrills, and high-tier syndicates from the lower sectors. In the center of the cathedral, where the altar used to be, a massive holographic projector towered toward the stained glass windows. Floating in the air was a rotating, 3-dimensional digital model of a human brain, pulsing with intricate, violet data pathways. "Welcome, bidders, to the apex of human evolution," a voice boomed over the cathedral's audio system. The auctioneer stood on a raised platform, his face completely obscured by a shifting metallic chrome mask. "Tonight we offer a truly singular asset, the complete, unredacted consciousness of Julian Vance, chief architect of the Synapse Institute's Global Synchronization Project." Lyra's grip tightened on the stone railing of the upper balcony. Seeing her sister's mind displayed as a commercial product made a sickening wave of fury wash over her. "The asset includes all research data, proprietary algorithms, and most importantly, the master encryption keys to the upcoming global update," the auctioneer continued, his voice dripping with synthetic charisma. "We will begin the bidding at 50 million crypto credits." Instantly, the digital boards around the room lit up. Corporate logos and anonymous bidder IDs flashed in rapid succession, the price climbing at a terrifying, astronomical rate. 60 million? 75 million? 100 million? "We can't outbid them," Lyra whispered desperately, looking at Kaylin. "We don't have that kind of capital. Kaylin, what's the backup plan? You said you could tap the physical server hosting the preview data." "I'm initiating the bypass now," Kaylin murmured, his fingers subtly moving over a compact hacking rig concealed within his blazer sleeve. If I can spoof the auction platform's local receiver, I can clone the mine dump data before the transaction closes. On the central stage, the holographic brain flared a deep, violent crimson as the bids skyrocketed past 200 million. The atmosphere in the cathedral grew suffocatingly tense. 250 million to the Vanguard Cybernetics Syndicate, the auctioneer shouted, his hands raised. Going once, going twice. Before the hammer could fall, the massive holographic display violently glitched. The color shifted from crimson to a blinding, brilliant gold. A new bidder ID flashed across the cathedral walls, completely overriding the system's interface. It wasn't an anonymous sequence of numbers. It was a single stylized corporate icon, a stylized eye embedded in a geometric web. The Synapse Institute logo. The price field beneath the logo cleared, replaced by a single, terrifying word: max value. The entire room went dead silent. The corporate executives and syndicate bosses stared at the display in absolute disbelief. Someone had just entered an unbiddable sum, a total system buyout that weaponized the auction platform's own legal parameters to force an immediate closure. The asset has been bought out, the auctioneer stammered, his confident facade completely shattering. The transaction is finalized. The buyer has claimed immediate physical custody of the server architecture. Did you get the clone? Lyra hissed, grabbing Kalen's arm. Kalen, tell me you copied the file. Kalen didn't answer. He was staring at his compact hacking rig, his face completely bloodless. The small screen was flashing a localized tracking vector, monitoring the physical location of the encrypted briefcase containing Julian's core files as it was moved by the automated auction drones. Kalen? Lyra demanded. The tracking signal, Kalen whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of confusion and raw terror. The buyer didn't route the data to the upper campus tower, Lyra. The automated courier drone just dropped the briefcase off at a secure terminal 3 blocks from here. He turned the screen toward her, showing the active, blinking GPS coordinate overlay. The tracking beacon for Julian's stolen mind was pointing directly through the reinforced front door of Kalen's own private apartment building. The rain outside the cathedral had turned into a torrential downpour, slicking the neon-lit streets of the lattice with a greasy sheen. Lyra kept her hand buried in her coat pocket, her fingers wrapped tight around the grip of her compact data spike. Every step she took beside Kalen felt like walking on broken glass. Keep your head down, Kalen muttered, his collar turned up against the wind as they navigated the narrow, crowded alley leading toward his apartment block. The corporate grid is going to be hyper-reactive after a buyout of that scale. Right. The grid, Lyra said, her voice hollow. Her mind was a chaotic loop of variables, none of them adding up. Kalen had been her only ally. He had helped her escape the enforcers, helped her scan her own fractured mind, and brought her to the auction. But the tracking data didn't lie. The anonymous buyer who had deployed an unbeatable, infinite credit buyout script to secure Julian's mind had routed the physical server briefcase directly to Kalen's coordinates. Was he working for Thorn from the start? She thought, her chest tightening. Did he bring me to the auction just to keep me contained while the transaction finalized? They reached the rusted exterior of his building, a decaying industrial concrete block wrapped in a web of external server cables and dripping air conditioning units. Kalen bypassed the electronic lock with a swipe of his wristcom, the heavy security door groaning open. The stairwell was dark, illuminated only by the rhythmic amber blink of a failing auxiliary generator. They walked up to the 3rd floor in absolute silence, the only sound the squelch of their wet boots against the concrete steps. When they reached his door, Kalen stopped. The reinforced steel door wasn't locked. In fact, it was unlatched, resting a mere fraction of an inch open. A faint, warm sliver of light from inside his workshop spilled out into the dark hallway. Kalen's posture shifted instantly, his muscles tensing beneath his tailored blazer. He subtly slipped his hand toward the inside of his jacket, reaching for his sidearm. Lyra, stay behind me. Someone breached the perimeter. Cut the act, Kalen, Lyra said, her voice dropping into a cold, dangerous register. Before he could turn around, she pulled her hand from her pocket. The heavy military-grade data spike hissed to life, its twin titanium prongs glowing with a lethal, high-voltage hum. She leveled it directly at the base of Kalen's skull, her hand trembling but her gaze unwavering. Kalen froze, his hand still hovering inside his blazer. "Lyra, what the hell are you doing?" "The tracking signal on your rig," she spat, a tear slipping down her cheek, cutting through her wet makeup. "It didn't just point to your building, Kalen. It pointed to your specific terminal ID. You bought her. You had the capital, or you had the corporate backing. Thorne paid you to reel me in, didn't he?" Kalen slowly raised his hands, turning his head just enough so she could see the raw, desperate sincerity in his eyes. "Lyra, look at my face. If I wanted to sell you out to Thorne, I could have let the enforcers take you in the workshop. I could have let the extraction agent stick you on the balcony. I don't know why the tracker is pointing here, but I swear to you on my life, it wasn't me." "Then who bought it?" she demanded, the data spike humming louder, mere inches from his skin. "Only one way to find out," Kalen whispered, nodding toward the cracked door. "We look inside together. If I blink wrong, you can fry my cortex. Deal?" Lyra swallowed the lump in her throat, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm. She maintained her stance, keeping the spike leveled at his neck as Kalen slowly reached out with his left hand and pushed the heavy steel door fully open. The door swung inward with a low creak. The workshop was immaculate, completely undisturbed. The rows of server racks hummed their usual low melody, and the holographic displays cast soft blue light across the room. But sitting directly in Kalen's central, high-backed leather operating chair was a figure. It was a man, dressed in a flawless, pristine white corporate suit that contrasted violently with the grime of the workshop. Resting flat across his lap was the high-security, golden-glowing server briefcase from the Codex auction. The tracking signal on Kalen's rig let out a continuous solid chime. The destination had been reached. "See?" Kalen whispered, his eyes wide. "I told you I—" "Shh!" Lyra cut him off, her gaze locked on the man in the chair. The man hadn't moved. He hadn't turned his head to look at them. His hands were resting limply on the handles of the briefcase, his fingers unnaturally still. Lyra slowly stepped past Kalen, her data spike still raised, approaching the front of the chair. As she cleared the angle of the armrest, the monitor light illuminated the man's face. Her breath hitched. The man was sitting completely upright, but his eyes were wide, milky, and vacant, staring blindly at the ceiling. Attached to both of his temples were two heavy, industrial-grade memory-wiping clamps, their internal cooling fluids sizzling with a sickening burnt plastic smell. The anonymous buyer hadn't brought the data here to hide it. They had been tracked down, cornered, and executed. Their entire brain tissue had been completely fried into liquid data, leaving nothing but a physical corpse holding a locked briefcase in the center of Kalen's home. The scent of scorched organic tissue and melting silicone hung heavy in the air, thick and metallic enough to taste. Lyra lowered her data spike by a fraction of an inch, the high-voltage hum suddenly feeling insignificant against the absolute silence of the room. "Is he—" Kalen started, his voice cracking as he stepped fully past the threshold, his hand dropping away from his sidearm. "He's completely fried," Lyra said, her voice dropping into a hollow whisper. She approached the corpse, her eyes wide as she examined the industrial-grade memory clamps fused to the dead man's skull. The flesh around the plastic housing was blistered and blackened. This wasn't a standard data extraction. This was a total system purge, a neurological scorched earth policy. Kalen knelt beside the chair, his fingers flying across the digital diagnostic panel built into the armrest. The local network logs. Someone hijacked my terminal's routing protocols from the outside. They used my personal signature to place the bid, routed the delivery drone here, and then executed a remote wipe on the buyer the second the briefcase touched his lap. To frame you, Lyra realized. the puzzle pieces clicking together with a terrifying, malicious logic. If the corporate grid traces the buyout, it points directly to Kalen Voss. You become the prime target for every syndicate in the city, while the real buyer walks away with a ghost trail. She looked down at the briefcase resting on the dead man's lap. The high-security lock was pulsing with a soft, stubborn amber light. It was a physical manifestation of Julian's mind, trapped in a gold-anodized alloy cage. "Can we open it?" Lyra asked, reaching her hand out toward the handle. "Don't touch it," Kalen barked, grabbing her wrist before her fingers could make contact with the metal casing. "Look at the seal interface. It's a proximity biometric trigger. If the system detects a foreign DNA signature that doesn't match the primary authorization code, it will deploy an internal thermite charge. It will vaporize the server plates inside before you can even blink." "Then whose signature does it need?" Lyra asked, her gaze drifting back to the dead man's milky, unblinking eyes. "His?" "No," Kalen murmured, leaning closer to the digital lock display. A tiny microscopic camera lens within the briefcase interface was cycling through a series of spectrum scans, its blue light washing over Lyra's face. The proxy buyer was just a delivery boy. The master key script is hunting for a specific neural frequency to authorize the unlatching sequence. The briefcase suddenly let out a sharp electronic chime. The amber light on the lock shifted, flashing a violent, rhythmic red. "System alert. Unauthorized network correlation detected. Local tracking vector. Registered to campus security grid. Status, perimeter breach, imminent." "They didn't just frame me, Lyra," Kalen said, his face draining of all remaining color as he stood up, his eyes darting to the primary security monitor on the wall. "They left a digital breadcrumb trail that leads straight to this room. They wanted Thorne's people to find us here with the corpse." Outside the heavy steel door, down in the dark stairwell of the apartment block, a sharp, synthesized sound tore through the quiet night. It wasn't the clumsy shouting of local street gangs or the standard sirens of the Lattice Night Watch. It was the terrifying harmonic hum of military-grade tactical engines, the signature sound of the Synapse Institute's elite containment division. "They're on the stairs," Kalen hissed, drawing his suppressed pistol and moving toward the doorway. "Lyra, grab your portable deck and whatever data files you can extract from my local drive. We have about 45 seconds before this entire floor becomes a kill zone." Lyra didn't move toward his terminal. Her eyes remained locked on the dead man in the chair, and more importantly, on the flashing red interface of the briefcase. Beneath the warning alerts, a tiny line of text was scrolling across the display, a hidden sequence embedded within the security code that she hadn't noticed before. It was an alphanumeric string she recognized instantly, the same exact coordinate sequence of the bedroom ceiling constellations she had used to bypass Julian's firewall in Chapter 1. The briefcase wasn't waiting for a corporate executive's code. It was waiting for her. Before Kalen could stop her, Lyra lunged forward, her bare palm slamming flat against the biometric scanner panel of the gold briefcase. "Lyra, no!" Kalen shouted, spinning around, his weapon raised. The briefcase shivered. The internal cooling pump surged with a sudden, violent whine, and for a terrifying second, Lyra braced herself for the flash of an internal thermite explosion. Instead, the violent red light on the display vanished, replaced by a brilliant, solid gold. The heavy mechanical latches on the briefcase clicked open with a soft, pressurized hiss, the top lid lifting an inch to reveal the pulsing violet core drive of Julian's mind dump inside. At that exact moment, the room's primary monitor glitched violently, overriding Kalen's diagnostic maps with a massive crimson text block that flashed in sync with the sirens outside. "Outbound transmission detected. Enforcer Strike Squad, Eero 1, authorized for total asset recovery. Orders, no survivors." The heavy steel apartment door didn't just buckle this time. It exploded inward with a deafening, concussive roar, showering the room in jagged metal shrapnel as the first tactical drone breached the perimeter. The concussive shockwave of the door exploding blew Lyra off her feet. She slammed hard into Kalen's primary server rack, the sharp edge of a cooling unit cutting through her dress and biting into her shoulder. Sparks showered over her as the rack short-circuited, filling the air with the acrid white smoke of burning lithium. Through the haze, a sleek four-legged tactical drone leaped over the debris of the doorway. Its optical sensor array spun a frantic blood-red circle across the room, locking onto the dead man in the chair before swinging toward Lyra. Pop, pop, pop. Kalen fired 3 high-velocity rounds from his suppressed pistol. The bullets struck the drone's reinforced frontal plating, causing it to swerve. Its mounted automated turret firing a wild burst that chewed a line of craters into the concrete ceiling above Lyra's head. "Grab the drive and move," Kalen roared, his voice sounding hollow and distant through the ringing in her ears. He dropped his empty magazine and slapped a fresh one into the grip, firing continuously to keep a second drone pinned behind the shattered doorframe. Lyra didn't think. She lunged through the smoke, her hands diving into the open briefcase. She gripped the central violet core drive, a heavy, cylindrical glass and polymer pod pulsing with Julian's thoughts, and yanked it free from its mounts. The internal backup batteries immediately clicked over, a faint blue indicator light showing a stable charge. She shoved the pod into her tactical pack, zipped it shut, and scrambled toward the rear of the workshop, where Kalen was already kicking open the heavy iron security gate leading to the external fire escape. The air outside hit them like a physical blow. Cold, violent rain that instantly soaked through Lyra's clothes. Below them, the narrow alleyway of the lattice was entirely blocked by 2 matte black corporate transport gunships, their searchlights painting the walls of the building in blinding geometric shapes. "Up!" Kalen shouted, grabbing her arm and pushing her toward the rusted iron ladder that climbed toward the rooftop scaffolding. "We can't go down. They've got a localized containment web covering the lower perimeter." They scrambled up the slick, freezing metal steps as automated gunfire began to rip through the iron grating beneath their boots. The enforcers were inside the apartment now, shooting out through the windows. A round clipped Kalen's shoulder, tearing through his tailored blazer and leaving a jagged streak of crimson. He grunted, stumbling, but kept his grip on the ladder, forcing his way upward. They broke onto the roof, a chaotic jungle of illegal satellite dishes, hydroponic water tanks, and tangled high-voltage lines. The rain was deafening up here, the wind howling through the massive structural scaffolding of the lattice. "There's a transit line 2 roofs over," Kalen panted, clutching his bleeding shoulder as they sprinted across the gravel surface. "If we can drop onto a cargo train, we can clear the sector before they lock down the rail grid." Before they could reach the edge of the roof, the air above them pressurized with a deep, rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum. A heavy containment hunter drone, easily the size of a compact car, dropped out of the storm clouds. Its searchlight pinned them in a brilliant cone of white light, the twin rotating barrels of its lethal underbelly minigun spinning up with a terrifying high-pitched whine. Lyra froze, her boots skidding on the wet gravel. There was no cover, no server racks to hide behind. They were completely exposed on a flat roof, caught in the crosshairs of a corporate execution algorithm. "Jump!" Kalen yelled, throwing his weight into her body, driving them both toward a rusted, heavy plastic water reservoir tank just as the drone opened fire. The sound of the minigun was a continuous, deafening roar. A hail of armor-piercing rounds shredded the concrete edge of the roof, turning the gravel into a deadly cloud of flying stone shrapnel. The plastic water tank exploded above them, dumping hundreds of gallons of gray water over their bodies, masking their thermal signatures for a brief, chaotic second. As they lay shivering, drenched in the dark water and gravel dust, the tactical display inside Lyra's pocket began to vibrate violently. It wasn't Kalen's hacking rig or her own portable deck. It was her personal phone. The screen was completely dark, but the center of the glass was pulsing with a single line of glowing text from an automated, heavily encrypted proxy node. Lyra pulled the device out with trembling fingers, the water streaming off her brow blurring her vision. She wiped the screen, staring at the message that had just bypassed a citywide corporate electronic warfare block. The sender ID read, Vance, J. The text beneath it was a single, chillingly precise instruction. Meet me where we first died, 12:09 a.m. The transit line had been a desperate, bone-breaking gamble. They had dropped 15 feet from the edge of a rusted roof scaffolding onto the canvas-covered roof of a moving automated cargo train, tumbling through the darkness as the corporate gunships searched the skies behind them. Now 3 hours later, the rain had slowed to a miserable, freezing mist. Lyra stood at the edge of a jagged concrete precipice, looking down into the neon nexus. To the rest of the city, this place didn't exist. It was a massive dead zone on the southern coast, a defunct, half-sunken amusement park built during the early tech boom, now abandoned for over a decade after a catastrophic industrial leak poisoned the local water table. The towering structural ribs of a massive roller coaster rose out of the black water like the skeleton of a prehistoric beast, choked with vines and glowing with pockets of bioluminescent moss. "Where we first died," Lyra murmured, her voice barely carrying over the distant sound of the dark sea crashing against the rusted seawall. Kalen leaned against a concrete pillar behind her, wrapping a fresh, sterile field bandage around his torn shoulder. His face was gray with exhaustion, the adrenaline finally fading to leave raw pain. "Are you sure this is what she meant, Lyra? This place is a graveyard. It's lead-shielded and completely off the city's power grid." "I'm certain," Lyra said, her eyes tracking the dark shapes of the abandoned structures. "We were 10 and 12. Our parents brought us here for the park's closing season. There was a structural failure on the Ferris wheel, a localized electrical surge that overloaded the passenger pods. Julian and I were trapped in the highest cabin for 6 hours while the circuit burned beneath us. We survived, but the news reports listed us as casualties for the first 12 hours before they got us down. Julian always called it the day we died and came back as ghosts." She checked her phone. The digital clock read 11:58 p.m. "We need to move," she said, adjusting her pack, ensuring the heavy violet core drive of Julian's mind dump was secure. They scrambled down the steep, cracked embankment, entering the perimeter through a gap in a rusted chain-link fence that bore faded, peeling biohazard warnings. The ground beneath their boots was spongy, a mixture of wet sand and decomposing synthetic turf. The air smelled of salt, rust, and the sharp, alkaline tang of old chemicals. The silence of the park was total, a suffocating contrast to the eternal roar of the lattice. The decaying stalls of carnival games stood like rows of small, open tombs, their plastic prizes long since rotted into unrecognizable shapes. They reached the central plaza. Towering over the black water of a central lagoon was the Ferris wheel. Its massive circular frame was a web of rusted iron, the passenger pods hanging at irregular angles like dead weights. 12 o'clock, Kalen muttered, his hand resting on the grip of his pistol, his eyes scanning the surrounding darkness. Nothing is happening. Lyra stepped up to the edge of the lagoon's concrete walkway. "Jules, I'm here. I brought the drive." Her voice bounced off the hollow structures dying in the mist. No one answered. The clock on her phone flipped to 4:29 a.m. Instantly, a deep mechanical groan vibrated straight through the ground beneath their feet. A low-frequency hum, so powerful it made Lyra's teeth ache, resonated from an underground generator bunker. A split second later, the dark park violently exploded with light. Thousands of ancient neon tubes along the walkways surged to life, flashing a chaotic, blinding array of pink, cyan, and electric green. Faded calliope music, warped and slowed down by decades of water damage, began to blare from hidden, blown-out speaker horns, its distorted melody sounding like a nightmare chorus. The Ferris wheel shivered, its massive gears grinding together with a horrific screech of metal against metal as the entire structure began to slowly rotate. "Lyra, look at the center hub," Kalen shouted, drawing his weapon as he dragged her back toward the cover of a collapsed concession stand. In the dead center of the rotating Ferris wheel, a cluster of high-powered industrial laser projectors flared into life. They didn't project random patterns. They shot thick beams of light through the mist, refracting off the water droplets to render a massive three-dimensional holographic projection in the air above the lagoon. It was a representation of Julian. The digital version of her sister was 20 feet tall, hovering over the dark water like a neon goddess. Her expression was completely blank, her eyes glowing with a faint, active data stream overlay. The holographic Julian slowly raised her hand, pointing a massive, luminous finger directly at the funhouse structure across the plaza, and as she did, the park's speakers cut the music, replacing it with a pre-recorded synthesized loop of Julian's voice that echoed across the abandoned grounds. "Hello, little bird." The projection boomed, its digital code flickering violently. "If you are hearing this, the first loop has closed. The enforcers are already tracking your biological markers. To survive the purge, you must enter the funnel. Go to the funhouse, Lyra, but remember the rules. What you see inside isn't a memory. It's a blueprint." Before Lyra could call out, the holographic projection of her sister violently fractured, its image twisting into a chaotic web of golden syntax errors before dissolving into the mist, leaving the funhouse doors across the plaza swinging open with a slow, deliberate